Welcome to the Spiritual Practices. At MAC, our hope is for everyone, man and woman, young and old, to grow in the grace and truth of Jesus. Our longing is that our church family is made up of those who desire above all to follow Jesus and become like Jesus. Can you imagine it? A whole community of people from every walk of life wholeheartedly following Jesus, becoming like him, a people who more and more each day talk like Jesus, think like Jesus, feel like Jesus, and act like Jesus. In John 15:5, Jesus said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." This word remain means to abide, stay for a while, be with. This journey of Christ-likeness begins with being with God, which begs the question, how do we establish and build daily connections with him? When Jesus came to the earth as a man, he showed us how humanity can connect and be with God. He left us a model to follow. So if we're going to become like him, it starts by following his model. Jesus, as a human, empowered with the very same spirit which empowers you and I through faith, experienced daily connection and communion with God through practices that any single person can practice too. Practices that, if we choose to embrace, will actually begin to change us from the inside out, making us more and more like him. These practices are the vehicle by which we engage God's Spirit and invite God's Spirit to lead and transform us. The practices of themselves don't do anything for us. Rather, they open us up to God, who will change us. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, "And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like him as we are changed into his glorious image." We're going to learn through these spiritual practices together. They include scripture, prayer, worship, community, witness, slowing, generosity, solitude, fasting, service, and Sabbath. Each lesson will include a short video teaching to introduce the spiritual practice, group discussion and group practice, an application for you to take home to grow and develop this practice personally. It's key to recognize that we don't have enough time in a 15-minute video or one discussion to cover everything about each spiritual practice. Rather, we'll be providing an introduction, an overview of this practice, a first conversation, which will be hopefully one of many more to follow. And this is meant to provide some practical and applicable understanding so you can begin to practice this spiritual engagement with God and others. We must also recognize to be with Jesus takes time. And I say take time because no one can make time. We are all given the same number of hours and minutes in a day. What we do with those hours and minutes identifies the things we value most. You cannot add the spiritual practices on top of your already crazy, busy, chaotic life. John Mark Comer has said it's not an issue of addition, but of subtraction. We must start by removing those things which take our attention away from being with Jesus. We must say no to some things so that we can say yes to being with Jesus. Or as Jesus once said to a woman named Martha, "You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." There is nothing, absolutely nothing more important than time with Jesus. We suggest starting by setting aside 30 minutes a day. For most of us, if we can't take 30 minutes every day to be with Jesus, it's because we've committed ourselves to lesser things in our lives, and we are missing out on the most important thing. Now, if you already have a lifestyle of daily time devoted to Jesus, consider how you can take another 15 minutes to practice a new way of connecting with Jesus through this study together. So as we prepare to engage in the spiritual practices in our next session, one preparation we must make is the subtraction of those things which keep us from the best thing. What are those lesser things for you? Netflix, social media, sports, shopping, hunting, maybe just an overall excess of personal or family activities. Whatever it is, consider what you can take out to spend time with Jesus. A final thought I want to leave you with is about the word practice. There are three primary definitions of the word practice that flesh out the meaning and the purpose of the spiritual practices. First, practice means actually the application or use of something. The spiritual practices do nothing for our connection with God if we don't apply them. We must respond to God's grace and take a step to draw near to God. And we can bank on his promise to draw near to us in those times. Secondly, Practice also means the customary, habitual, or expected method or way of doing something. Sometimes Christians act as if we have no idea how to connect with God, but Jesus showed us how. If that isn't enough, we have 2,000 years of testimony from believers who followed Jesus' model of the spiritual practices, and they had a life where they were deeply connected to God, meaningful connection with Him time and time again. The method is there, our practice of the method is not. Thirdly, practice means repeated exercise in or performance of an activity or skill so as to acquire or maintain proficiency in it. This is why spiritual practices have also been called spiritual disciplines. They don't come automatically. They, like all the best things in life, take repetition, devotion, and practice to grow confident and competent in. Don't be discouraged when it takes time for these habits to become part of your daily life. Don't be discouraged when it feels like work for days and weeks. If you're intentional to push through that initial discouragement, in time these practices will become a deep source of joy for your souls as you experience closeness with God through them. A helpful way to think about it is like this. If you enjoy sports or music or art, more than likely you are skilled in those things and you've invested time in those things. You had to endure hours, days, even years of repetition of the mundane practice to master them. Learning how to play the right note, make the ideal brushstroke, complete a textbook crossover didn't happen overnight. But had you not put in the time, sweat, and heart into all those fundamental aspects of that discipline, you never would have completed that song or that painting or that perfect play. So it is with the spiritual practices. We must throw away all sense of immediate gratification and strap in for a journey. A journey which at times may feel like walking uphill both directions, but that promises to fill our souls and hearts with the life and love of God. It takes intentionality, it takes commitment, it takes repetition to establish these connections with God as rhythms and habits for our spiritual life. And while these practices require discipline, they produce delight, joy, and life for our souls as we connect with God. The spiritual practices are different ways in which you can connect with God in both a daily and an experiential way. As we do our part by lovingly and obediently offering our time and hearts to God, He does the work within us that only He can do by transforming our soul and bringing satisfaction to our lives. I will use Paul's prayer from Ephesians 3 to close our time together. I pray that from God's glorious, unlimited resources, He will empower you with inner strength through His Spirit. Then Christ will make His home in your heart as you trust in Him. Your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. And may you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide and how long and how high and how deep His love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. May we experience this together as we engage in the spiritual practices God has given us.